Commander Jake Morrison felt his stomach drop as warning lights flashed red across his control panel. The research pod shook violently as it plunged through the thick atmosphere of the unknown planet below. He had been part of the crew aboard the massive exploration ship Aurora when a deadly meteor shower tore through their hull like paper. The captain had ordered all hands to abandon ship, sending dozens of escape pods spinning into the void. Now Jake was alone, hurtling toward a world no human had ever seen before. His hands moved quickly over the controls, trying to slow his descent, but half the systems were already dead. Sparks flew from broken circuits as the pod's hull began to glow red from the heat of entry. Come on, Jake muttered through gritted teeth, pulling hard on the steering controls. The ground rushed up to meet him through the small window. He could see a vast forest of strange, tall trees that seemed to sparkle like crystal in the alien sunlight. The impact hit him like a giant fist. His safety straps cut deep into his chest as the pod bounced twice, then skidded through the forest floor, crushing the strange crystal trees beneath it. Finally, it came to rest against a large boulder with a grinding crash that made Jake's ears ring. Smoke filled the small cabin. Jake coughed and fumbled for the emergency release on his door. It took 3 hard kicks before the warped metal gave way, and he stumbled out onto solid ground. His legs shook from the crash, but nothing seemed broken. The forest around him was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The trees were not made of wood, but some kind of clear, blue crystal that made soft ringing sounds when the wind blew through them. The air smelled clean and sweet, with a hint of something like cinnamon. Purple grass grew in patches between silver rocks, and tiny flying creatures that looked like glowing butterflies danced between the crystal branches. Jake looked back at his ruined pod and felt his heart sink. The communication equipment was completely destroyed, crushed beyond repair. No way to call for help. No way to let anyone know he had survived the crash. He was truly alone on this strange world. He pulled what supplies he could from the wreckage. A small medical kit, some emergency food bars that tasted like cardboard, a basic toolkit, and his standard-issue laser pistol with about half a charge left. Not much to survive on an alien planet, but it would have to do. As he organized his meager supplies, Jake heard a sound that made him freeze. It was soft and high-pitched, almost like crying. But it was not human crying. The sound came from somewhere nearby, behind a pile of fallen crystal trees and broken rocks. Jake approached carefully, his hand on his weapon. The crying sound came again, weaker this time. He climbed over the pile of debris and looked down into a small hollow in the ground. What he saw there made him forget all about his own troubles. 3 small creatures huddled together in the dirt. They looked somewhat like foxes, but their fur was a beautiful silver-blue color that seemed to shimmer in the light. Each was about the size of a house cat, with large amber-colored eyes that held an intelligence Jake had never seen in any earth animal. Their ears were pointed and mobile, constantly turning to catch the slightest sound. The creatures were injured. One had a deep cut across its side where a sharp rock had hit it. Another had what looked like a broken front leg. The third, slightly larger than the others, watched Jake with wary eyes while trying to shield its injured companions with its small body. Jake realized that the pile of debris had once been some kind of shelter or den. The same meteor shower that had damaged his ship must have caused rockfalls all across this region. These little creatures had been trapped when their home collapsed around them. "Hey there, little ones," Jake said softly, crouching down slowly so he would not frighten them. "I am not going to hurt you." The largest creature made a soft chirping sound and tilted its head. Its ears twitched forward, as if it was trying to understand his words. Jake was amazed by how expressive its face was. Those amber eyes seemed to look right into his soul. Carefully, Jake reached into his medical kit and pulled out some antiseptic and bandages. He had no idea if human medicine would work on alien creatures, but he had to try. The injuries looked serious, and these babies would die without help. "It is okay," he whispered, moving very slowly as he approached the injured creatures. "I want to help." To his surprise, the largest creature seemed to understand his intentions. It moved aside and made soft encouraging sounds to its companions. Jake gently cleaned the wounds while the creatures remained still, as if they knew he was trying to help them. As he worked, Jake felt something he had not expected. These were not just animals. There was real intelligence in their eyes, real trust as they allowed him to treat their injuries. When he finished bandaging their wounds, the smallest one nuzzled his hand with its tiny nose, making a sound almost like purring. Night was falling, and the alien forest was growing cold. Jake gathered some dry crystal fragments that burned with a warm, blue flame when he lit them with his emergency lighter. He made a small shelter using pieces of his damaged pod and settled down with his supplies. The 3 little creatures huddled close to him for warmth. Jake shared his emergency food with them, breaking the bars into small pieces. They ate eagerly, making happy chirping sounds. As the strange alien stars appeared overhead, Jake felt less alone than he had since the crash. 3 days had passed since the crash, and Jake had settled into a routine with his small alien companions. He had given them names based on the markings on their foreheads. The largest one he called Star, because of the white star-shaped mark above her eyes. The second he named Blaze for the red streaks in her fur, and the smallest became Echo because she always repeated the sounds the others made. Jake had found edible berries growing on low bushes and discovered that the crystal trees dripped a sweet sap that provided energy. The cubs were healing well under his care. Their cuts were closing, and the one with the broken leg could now walk with only a slight limp. They followed Jake everywhere, chattering in their musical language and showing him which plants were safe to eat. The cubs were incredibly smart. They had learned to understand several of his words and had begun teaching him their own way of speaking. They used different chirps and clicks for different things, and they pointed with their paws to show him what they meant. Jake was amazed at how quickly they learned from each other. On the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. Jake was gathering berries while the cubs played nearby when Star suddenly froze. Her ears snapped back against her head, and she made a low growling sound that Jake had never heard before. Her whole body went rigid as she stared into the forest. Blaze and Echo immediately stopped playing and ran to hide behind Jake's legs. Their happy chirping turned into frightened whimpers. All 3 cubs were looking in the same direction, their eyes wide with terror. Jake grabbed the sharp stick he had carved into a spear and turned to see what had scared them so badly. At first, he saw nothing but the crystal trees and purple grass. Then a shadow moved between the trees, and Jake felt his blood turn cold. The creature that stepped into the clearing was a nightmare made real. It stood 8 feet tall on 6 powerful legs that ended in claws the size of kitchen knives. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur, but along its back grew a ridge of sharp crystal spines that gleamed like knives in the sunlight. Its head was wolf-like but larger, with a mouth full of teeth like black daggers. Most frightening of all were its eyes. They were not the mindless eyes of a wild animal. These were intelligent eyes, calculating eyes. This creature was a thinking predator, and it was looking at Jake and the cubs like they were its next meal. Jake stepped in front of the cubs, raising his spear. The creature tilted its head and made a sound that might have been laughter. It was not afraid of him at all. Then Jake heard sounds from the forest around them, and his heart sank. More shapes were moving between the trees. This thing was not hunting alone. One by one, more of the creatures emerged from hiding places around the clearing. Jake counted 8 of them in total, all massive, all armed with those terrible claws and teeth. They moved with practiced coordination, spreading out to surround Jake and the cubs. These were pack hunters, and they knew exactly what they were doing. The largest creature, with old scars across its muzzle, seemed to be the leader. It made a series of growling sounds, and the others began to close in slowly. They were in no hurry. They knew their prey had nowhere to run. Jake's mind raced. He could not fight 8 of these monsters with just a wooden spear. His laser pistol might kill 1 or 2, but then it would be empty. He had to think of something else. Run, he whispered to the cubs without taking his eyes off the predators. Get to those old buildings. Through the trees, Jake could see the ruins of what looked like ancient stone buildings. If they could reach those ruins, maybe they could find a place to defend themselves. But the cubs did not want to leave him. They pressed closer to his legs, making distressed sounds. Go! Jake shouted, and finally Star understood. She nipped at Blaze and Echo, driving them toward the ruins while making urgent chittering sounds. The 3 cubs ran as fast as they could toward the stone buildings. The predators immediately gave chase. Jake threw his spear at the nearest one, and it struck the creature in the shoulder. The monster roared in pain and anger but kept coming. Jake turned and ran after the cubs, crashing through the crystal trees as the pack thundered behind him. His human legs were no match for the 6-legged hunters, but the cubs had given him a head start. He could hear the creatures gaining on him, their claws scraping against the crystal tree trunks as they bounded from trunk to trunk. Jake reached the ruins just as the first hunter pounced. He dove sideways, and the creature's claws scraped against the stone wall where his head had been a moment before. He rolled to his feet and grabbed a piece of broken stone, swinging it hard against the creature's skull. The impact sent vibrations up his arm, but the monster fell. The cubs were chittering frantically from somewhere deeper in the ruins. Jake ran toward their voices as the remaining 7 hunters regrouped outside. He could hear them making planning sounds, coordinating their next attack. Jake found the cubs in a large room with several passages leading deeper into the ancient buildings. The walls were covered with strange carvings and pictures. But Jake had no time to study them now. The hunters were coming, and he had to find a way to keep his small family alive. Jake pulled the 3 cubs deeper into the ancient stone buildings as the sound of claws scraping against rock echoed behind them. The hunters were testing the entrances, looking for the best way to get inside. Jake needed to find a place they could defend, somewhere the big creatures could not easily reach them. The ruins were much larger than they had looked from outside. Long corridors stretched in different directions, carved from the same crystal material as the forest trees. But these crystals were different colors, deep blues and purples that seemed to glow with their own soft light. The cubs stayed close to Jake, their ears constantly moving as they listened for danger. As they moved deeper into the building, Jake noticed something strange about the walls. They were covered with pictures carved into the stone. The pictures showed creatures that looked exactly like his 3 cubs, but full-grown and walking on 2 legs like humans. They were building cities, making tools, and living peaceful lives. But there were other creatures in the pictures too. Jake felt his stomach drop when he recognized them. The same 6-legged hunters that were chasing them now, but in these old pictures, they were not hunting. They were working together with the cubs people. They were friends. Star made a sad chirping sound and pointed at one picture with her paw. It showed the 2 different peoples living together in harmony. But as Jake followed the pictures along the wall, the story changed. Later pictures showed something falling from the sky, like burning stars. After that, the hunters in the pictures looked different. Their eyes were wild and angry. They were attacking the peaceful people who looked like the cubs. What happened here? Jake whispered to himself. Some kind of disaster had changed everything. The hunters had not always been monsters. Something had driven them crazy and turned them against their former friends. Echo tugged at Jake's pants and pointed down a side corridor. Jake followed her and gasped at what he found. It was a room full of strange devices that hummed with energy when he touched them. They looked like weapons, but unlike any weapons Jake had ever seen. They were sleek and curved, made from the same glowing crystal as the walls. Blaze picked up one of the smaller devices and showed Jake how to hold it. When he wrapped his fingers around the handle, it began to glow brighter. Star chittered excitedly and demonstrated how to point it and make it work. A beam of bright blue energy shot from the end and burned a hole in the far wall. Jake quickly gathered several of the weapons and checked their power levels. They seemed to be fully charged and ready to use. The cubs knew how to work them, which meant their people had made these weapons long ago to defend themselves. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors. The hunters had found a way inside. Jake counted the passages leading into their room and realized they would be coming from multiple directions. He needed to set up defenses fast. Working quickly, Jake used pieces of broken stone to block the smaller passages, leaving only 2 ways for the hunters to reach them. He positioned the energy weapons where he could grab them easily and told the cubs to hide behind a large stone table that would protect them from claws. The first attack came just as Jake finished his preparations. A massive hunter burst through the main doorway, its red eyes glowing in the crystal light. Jake grabbed one of the energy weapons and fired. The blue beam struck the creature in the chest, and it fell with a roar that shook the entire building. But 2 more hunters immediately took its place. Jake fired again and again, but the weapons were harder to aim than his laser pistol had been. One hunter got close enough to swipe at him with its claws, tearing his shirt and leaving shallow cuts across his chest. Star surprised Jake by grabbing one of the smaller weapons. She could barely lift it, but she managed to fire it at the hunter's feet, making it jump back. Blaze and Echo joined in, working together to carry another weapon and fire it when Jake told them to. For several minutes, the room was filled with the sounds of energy beams and roaring hunters. Jake managed to kill 2 more of the creatures, but he was running out of energy charges. The weapons were getting dimmer with each shot. Then the attack stopped. Jake could hear the remaining hunters moving around outside the room, but they were not charging in anymore. They were being more careful now, planning their next move. Jake used the quiet time to explore more of the room. In a corner behind some fallen stones, he found something that made his heart race with hope. It was a larger weapon, much more powerful than the others. But it was also more complicated. There were symbols on it that he could not read, and it seemed to require some kind of special knowledge to operate. Star came over and looked at the weapon. She made soft clicking sounds and touched different parts of it in a specific pattern. The weapon began to glow with a deep purple light that was much brighter than the others. Jake realized that the cubs knew more about these ancient weapons than they had shown him. Their people had built this place as a fortress, somewhere to hide when the hunters turned against them. And now, after all these years, it was serving the same purpose again. The sound of claws on stone told Jake that the hunters were getting ready for another attack. But this time, he was ready for them too. The hunters had been circling the ancient room for hours, testing Jake's defenses. Every time one of them tried to rush through the doorways, Jake would fire the energy weapons and drive them back. But his ammunition was running dangerously low. The crystal weapons were losing their glow, and he had used most of the power charges. Star, Blaze, and Echo huddled behind the stone table, their eyes wide with fear. They could hear the hunters moving in the corridors outside, making low growling sounds as they planned their final attack. Jake counted only 3 energy weapons that still had enough power for maybe 1 or 2 more shots each. The cubs had been incredibly brave during the fighting. Star had learned to reload the weapons by touching them in the right pattern, while Blaze and Echo worked together to carry the heavy devices to wherever Jake needed them. But they were just babies, and Jake could see they were getting tired and scared. "It is going to be okay," Jake whispered to them, but he was not sure he believed his own words. The hunters were smart. They knew his weapons were almost empty. They were just waiting for the right moment to rush in all at once. That moment came just before dawn. Jake heard a sound like thunder as all 5 remaining hunters charged through both doorways at the same time. There were too many of them coming from too many directions. Jake fired his weapon at the first hunter, and it fell, but 2 more leaped over its body. One of the huge creatures landed right next to the stone table where the cubs were hiding. Its massive claws swept toward little Blaze, who was too frightened to move. Jake saw those deadly claws about to tear his cub apart, and something deep inside his mind snapped. Jake had always been a calm, thinking man. He was a scientist, not a warrior. But watching those claws reach for Blaze awakened something primitive and powerful in his chest. These were not just alien creatures he was protecting anymore. They were his children. His family. His pack. The roar that came from Jake's throat was not human. It was the sound of a parent whose babies were in danger, the sound of a pack leader defending his territory. Without thinking, Jake threw himself at the massive hunter that was threatening Blaze. He had no weapon, no plan. He just knew that nothing was going to hurt his cubs while he was alive. Jake landed on the hunter's back and wrapped his arms around its thick neck, trying to choke it. The creature bucked and spun, trying to throw him off, but Jake held on with desperate strength. The hunter slammed Jake against the stone wall, and he felt ribs crack. But he did not let go. He bit the creature's ear and clawed at its eyes, fighting like a wild animal. The hunter roared in pain and anger, but it could not shake Jake loose. Meanwhile, the other hunters were advancing on the cubs. Star grabbed the last working energy weapon, but it was too heavy for her small body. She could barely lift it, much less aim it properly. Echo and Blaze tried to help her, but the weapon was meant for adult hands. Seeing his cubs struggling to defend themselves while he fought their attacker, Jake felt his rage grow even stronger. He managed to get his hands around a sharp piece of broken crystal and drove it deep into the hunter's neck. Hot blood sprayed across his face as the creature collapsed. But there were still 3 more hunters advancing on his family. Jake grabbed the fallen hunter's own claws and pulled them free. They were as long as knives and sharp as razors. He had never used weapons like this before, but somehow his hands knew what to do. The largest hunter, the scarred leader of the pack, stepped between Jake and the cubs. It was twice Jake's size, with claws that could cut him in half and teeth that could crush his bones. Any sane person would have run or tried to negotiate. Jake did neither. He stepped forward, holding the makeshift claw weapons, and stared directly into the monster's red eyes. He was not running anymore. He was not hiding. This was his territory now, these were his cubs, and nothing was going to take them from him. The hunter seemed confused by Jake's behavior. It had probably never encountered prey that fought back so fiercely. Most creatures ran when faced with a pack of these killers. But Jake was not running. He was advancing. Jake lunged at the pack leader with both claw weapons extended. The huge creature was faster and stronger, but Jake was fighting with the desperate fury of a parent. He dodged the hunter's first swipe and managed to rake his stolen claws across its front leg. The creature roared and struck back, its claws tearing deep cuts across Jake's shoulder and chest. Blood poured down Jake's shirt, but he felt no pain. All he could think about was protecting Star, Blaze, and Echo. He feinted left, then spun right, driving both claws deep into the hunter's side. The creature staggered but did not fall. Behind him, Jake could hear his cubs making brave chittering sounds as they tried to help him fight. Star had finally managed to fire the last energy weapon, and one of the remaining hunters collapsed. But the pack leader was still standing, still dangerous, and Jake was losing too much blood to fight much longer. The final battle was about to begin. Jake opened his eyes to gentle touches on his face. Small, soft paws were carefully cleaning the blood from his wounds with cool water and something that smelled like healing herbs. Star, Blaze, and Echo were taking care of him, making soft worried sounds as they worked. His whole body ached, and deep cuts across his chest and shoulders burned like fire. But he was alive. Jake looked around the ancient room and saw the massive body of the pack leader lying motionless nearby. Its neck was bent at a strange angle. Somehow, in the final moments of their fight, Jake had managed to kill the huge creature. The other hunters were gone. Jake could not tell if they had run away or if he and the cubs had killed them all. His memory of the last part of the battle was unclear. He remembered only rage and the desperate need to protect his small family. Star chirped softly and showed Jake a collection of plants she had gathered from the forest. Even though she was still very young, she seemed to know exactly which leaves would help his cuts heal and which berries would give him strength. Blaze and Echo had torn strips of cloth from Jake's damaged shirt to make bandages. For 3 weeks, the cubs nursed Jake back to health with the patience and skill of trained doctors. They brought him food and water, changed his bandages, and never left his side for long. During this time, Jake began to understand just how intelligent these creatures really were. They were not just smart animals. They had language, culture, and knowledge that had been passed down through generations. Star taught Jake the names of different plants and their uses. Blaze showed him how to read some of the symbols carved on the walls. Echo demonstrated complex mathematical concepts by arranging stones in patterns. As Jake grew stronger, he noticed that other creatures were beginning to appear at the edge of the ruins. Adult versions of his cubs, but much larger and walking upright on their hind legs. They watched from a distance at first, too scared to come closer. They had been hiding deep in the forest ever since the hunters had turned savage. Star, Blaze, and Echo served as translators between Jake and the adult survivors. The cubs had learned enough human words to explain that Jake was a friend, a protector who had risked his life to save them from the hunters. Slowly, the adults began to trust him. The adult creatures told Jake their history through pictures and simple words that the cubs translated. Their people were called the Vulari. They had once lived in great crystal cities and had been friends with the hunters, who were called the Scarix. But something had fallen from the sky long ago, bringing a sickness that drove the Scarix mad with hunger and rage. The Vulari had built these ruins as hiding places, but most of their people had been killed over the generations. Only a few small groups remained, scattered and afraid. They had been slowly dying out until Jake arrived and proved that the hunters could be defeated. One morning, Jake heard a sound that made his heart race with hope. The deep roar of rocket engines echoed across the forest. A human rescue ship was landing nearby. Jake grabbed Star's paw and ran toward the sound, with Blaze and Echo close behind. The ship was called the Aurora's Hope, and it was captained by a woman named Emma Reeves. She had been searching for survivors from the original Aurora for months. When she saw Jake emerge from the forest with 3 alien cubs at his side, her eyes went wide with amazement. "Jake Morrison," she said, reading his name tag. "We thought you were dead. What are these creatures?" "They are my family," Jake said simply. He explained everything that had happened since his crash, how the cubs had saved his life just as much as he had saved theirs. Captain Reeves was fascinated by Jake's story. She wanted to take him back to Earth immediately so he could report on this amazing first contact with intelligent alien life. Jake would be famous throughout the galaxy as the first human to communicate with another species. But when the time came to board the ship, Jake hesitated. Star, Blaze, and Echo stood beside him, looking up with their large amber eyes. Behind them, the adult Vulari watched nervously from the forest edge. They had just begun to rebuild their civilization with Jake's help, and they still needed his protection. "I cannot leave them," Jake told Captain Reeves. "They are still in danger. There might be more hunters out there. And they trust me. If I go back to Earth now, they might hide in the forest forever and slowly disappear." Captain Reeves smiled. "Then I guess we are not taking you home. We are bringing home to you." Within days, the Aurora's Hope became the first human Vulari research station. Scientists and engineers from Earth worked alongside the brilliant Vulari to rebuild their ancient cities and develop new technologies. Star, Blaze, and Echo became the first alien ambassadors, teaching human children about Vulari culture while learning human games and stories. Jake found his life's purpose in this strange new world. He was no longer just a scientist studying alien life. He was a bridge between two species, a father to 3 cubs who had grown into wise young adults, and a leader in the first truly integrated human-alien community. Years later, when more Scarix appeared at the edge of the colony, they did not come as hunters. Jake and the Vulari had found a cure for the ancient sickness that had driven them mad. The former enemies became friends once again, just as they had been in the old pictures on the walls. The pack was complete. The family was safe. And in the vast reaches of space, two species had learned that love and protection could cross any boundary.